Hey there, welcome to Teams That Swear. I'm Adrian Balarjan, author of Teams That Swear by Each Other and Not About Each Other. This episode's part of a special series, Lunch with Adrian the Canadian. It's a little bit longer, but it's well worth it. This is where I invite leaders to a virtual lunch, alongside a number of other leaders from around the world, for a relaxed but real conversation. It's a little more personal, and it's about the story behind the title, the moments that shaped how these leaders have led, and the stuff they usually keep off LinkedIn. Now today I'm joined by someone I've had hours of these conversations with, Kerry Gassner. Now Kerry's journey isn't typical. He's gone from homicide detective and undercover task force to leading game day security for AFL matches in China, to now running one of Australia's busiest sporting and concert venues at John Cain Arena in Melbourne. From driving trucks on P-plates to tracking Australia's most wanted, he's seen what pressure really looks like. And he's got a lot to say about perspective, trust, and leading without power trips. What I love about Kerry is his honesty. He's not here to impress you. He's here to share. You'll hear about the scars and the lessons. You'll hear about why leadership without people at the center just doesn't work. And you'll also hear why he believes power is a sugar fix and reflection is the real driver. So, grab your lunch, take us on a walk, take us for your drive. This is Lunch with Adrian the Canadian, and here's my conversation with Kerry Gassner. So just for some context as to how Kerry ended up here today, Kerry and I have met through the baseball world. So those that know me well know that baseball plays a pretty big role in my life and has given me a lot of opportunities and a lot of happiness. Kerry and I ended up driving a change management project across the Victorian baseball community, one of the biggest changes that they've experienced in 30 years. And that's how we first met. But I suspect you've met people at your life at a certain stage where you've gone, oh, you just connect with them right away. You just want to catch up and pick their brains on a number of different things. You have similar interests, and you could talk about certain topics forever. And even though you're not working day to day together, it just feels like they're on your team. And that's how I would describe Kerry. We met last year through this change management project, but since then had many talks, and it always usually comes back to leadership, personal development, and career development. So that's how we met. But as most of you know through the invitation, Kerry's got a pretty interesting career. Having started out, baseball played a big part of his career, his life growing up. Then professionally worked with the Victorian Police Department for 12 years, was part of the Piranha Task Force, which, like when I moved to Australia in 2005, this was at the height of Underbelly and Tony Mockbell and Benji Veneman and all these names that I remember watching on Underbelly show. And when Kerry told me that, I thought, whoa, there would be some interesting experiences having worked on that, and as well as a homicide detective. Then made this like crazy shift from police work to the AFL, and then ended up working in the AFL in a couple different spots, but also involved with bringing the games to China when the AFL brought forward their games in their attempt to expand globally. And then maybe a little bit more related, and from one sports world to the other, is now the venue manager at John Cain Arena, which hosts a number of professional sporting events, concerts. Ice Cube wasn't there, as we talked about before, but often if you follow Kerry on Instagram or any of the social channels, you see a lot of the work that their team does, and it looks all really cool because you get to see the fun stuff, but there's a lot of hard work that goes into that. So that's enough for me, Kerry. I'm going to hand it over to you. I've kind of given the high level, but love just to learn a little bit more about you. And you can kind of take that where you want. At some stage, maybe it'd be good to kind of like how you ended up in the police force, and then we can kind of delve into your experiences there.
Lovely work. Hello, everybody. Really wrapped to be here with AJ to do this. This is And you're going to have to excuse me, not something that I do all the time and the like, but I am very much a believer that everyone has a story, and I'm very humbled by the fact that there's an interest in the story, just like in my story, just like others. I'm very interested in hearing from others. So, as AJ said, look, please butt in with any questions or anything today. If you find it interesting, amazing. But a lot of this is just, experience. And, I was talking with AJ the other day that we're all shaped by our own experiences, whether that's from childhood all the way up through our professional and social lives, and the like. So, and I'm no different from anyone else in that sense. But yes, very much an interesting journey, one that I've absolutely loved in a lot of ways, and one that I wouldn't say that I have completely planned. But I think one thing that's remained common with myself is just always being open and looking at every opportunity, every moment as an opportunity, and being curious to where it may or could and may lead. And I think that's, in reflection of myself, has played out well and truly. Hence the reason I sit here as a venue manager at John Cain Arena and have been able to experience some amazing things through my life, whether it's, being a truck driver out of school. I always wanted to become a policeman. My dad was a policeman. I couldn't join because I was 17 when I finished year 12. Had no interest in university at that stage and studying, but I just wanted to become a policeman. And I found a career in truck driving, doing interstate truck driving. I was on my P plates, driving a semi-trailer up and down to Sydney, which was, to be honest, I will probably retire that way. It was just fun to be with my wife and I, talk about buying a truck in our retirement and just picking up, loads and those sort of things. And, we've been connected by travelling. We do quite a bit. We've just got back from the Murray River and the things, so that's very prevalent in our lives. But one thing that taught me of furniture transport and truck driving is really good work ethic, what it's like to actually work with people. I mean, one of the stories, that I really enjoyed back at those times was the ability that, you have an impact on someone's moving day, or they're moving, their whole life up and down, the east coast of Australia, and you have that responsibility. And I think I've always enjoyed a responsibility to help others and be part of that. And that's one thing, if I look back now, has been very much at the centre of what I've done, and that translated into 6-7 years of doing that. But police did beckon me, it got me back in, which was really cool. And I think I was ready and at a bit more of a mature age at 23, 24 when I went into the police academy. Had a bit of life experience, had a lot of on baseball. I was very fortunate to play at a decent level of baseball, so I had some good experience traveling overseas with that. So I think, when I hit 24, I was very much ready to become a policeman and really thrived in that environment and worked my way through the eastern suburbs of Melbourne, out to the northern suburbs. And I knew straight away that I wanted to become a detective. I think, that always drew. My dad was one. I think it probably plays into that a little. One thing I could never do is pull people over. I was never going to join the highway patrol, mainly because I'm probably the worst offender there is, but don't tell anyone that. But that paved the way where I started to really realise I enjoyed, again, the responsibility to the community and, helping people and the like. And that, I think, working to become a detective was at the centre of that. And then soon saw, through that period, I started to really look at opportunities to go to a high performing environment, being the Homicide squad, and that became my goal. And that, that drove me professionally to really guide my career there. And I was able to reach that in 2011. But the day that I got told about that, my inspector came in to me and goes, "Listen, you're now been accepted into the Homicide squad," which was, and it still is, held in incredibly high regard within Victoria Police, to be able to work there. And there's no greater honour is to investigate the death of a loved one. And whilst a lot of people will associate the darker side of homicides, I think the people connection that you gain from doing that is very much sat at the centre of me, and still remains with me in the career that I have now.
Harry,
Um,
can I ask you a question?
yeah,
Because
go
um,
for it.
like getting into, let's call it, it's interesting that you call it that high performance environment, like with the homicide.
Mm.
Um, what was that like joining initially? Like, what were some of the surprises or some of the challenges? Sometimes you get into a new job. I'm working with a client right now, and we're catching up the second time later today. And they got a new gig, and they're like, "Yeah, I'm still kind of working out exactly what the job is, and I'm finding some things under the hood that I wasn't quite expecting." There's a few more challenges than what I was sold on. But when you go into that environment in homicide, what were some of the things that surprised you or that you found difficult?
Um, I'll answer it this way, AJ, because that part of the story, when I got told that I was going to homicide, I actually got told, well, we're not actually going to send you there. You've achieved it. Well done. We're going to send you to the Piranha Task Force. And that was an environment that I didn't have a lot of interest for it. I mean, in the sense of it wasn't the underworld killings that you were
Yeah, yeah.
alluding to before. I came in at a later stage, but it ended up being a 2-year investigation on a crime identity that I'm not allowed to really talk about. However, it became a 2-year investigation there, and that was I was pretty disappointed because I mean, as much as I thought, yes, great opportunity, I was also wanted to fulfill my dream. So I walked into a very small unit. It was a very covert investigation that was it had a lot of challenges within it. Um, Walked into that environment, and to exactly what you were saying, AJ, is that yeah, it doesn't seem to sit right with me. It didn't, and to be honest, it probably took me 2, 3 months into that workload. I just wanted to be at homicide. I've strived my whole career at that stage to be there, but here I am sitting in a small office, not even in a police centre. So we were very divided off and offline for good reason. But I remember I had a lot of good people talk to me, and I think this is probably a bit of defining moment for me, is that the disappointment that was festering inside of me, saying, I don't want to be here. I want to be where I've strived for. It actually opened my mind up. And a lot of good advice that I got was just to really keep an open mind around what this opportunity has for you. Um, and there was a bit of perspective that I was able to receive from different people that were very either close to me or, that I certainly looked up to. Um, and they wanted to provide a bit of perspective around the value that I could add to this task force. Reassurance was really key that, your goal of being a homicide is still alive and well. We have chosen you to come across to be part of this. And then the advice also started to point me towards making every moment an opportunity to learn. And I think once I had that reassurance and once I gained a bit of perspective, and it took me a while to get to that perspective, I was able to start to see the real positives in what an investigation like this was and what it represented for my career at the time. And this is all localized, in a period of time in my career. For me, I was able to work there for 2 years. We were able to arrest and put the bad person in jail. I'm going to speak very colloquially here. We were able to finish that investigation, and it was an incredibly important one for Victoria Police and even some national police from a national policing perspective. And on reflection now, if I didn't do that, I don't know if I ever would have really confronted something that was actually quite challenging for me, which was the disappointment and not being able to get over the disappointment of being in a place that I just didn't want to be originally. So this put me on a very much a path, and this still plays a big part of my career now of just making every moment an opportunity and being open and creating perspective and the like. Because the reality is, at the end of that 2 years, on a personal front, I was 34 and I got diagnosed with some heart disease, and I had a quadruple bypass. So at the end of that, it was literally the
34.
end of that investigation at 34. So if you want a good dose of perspective, and how funny things work out, that 2 years, I would have got to homicide and I probably would have not been in a position to be able to deal with, what was it, the health challenges that were put before me now. very lucky. Had the surgery, came out, recovered, and my first day back, after long-term sick leave was walking into Homicide Squad. So it's funny how the world works out, but it also gained a lot of perspective, a lot of understanding. Something that I felt really uncomfortable with, and this, the ability to work through that. This put me onto a pathway through that now. So I ended up at Homicide, and 2 years
Yeah.
later, but with a nice big couple of scars to do it. But I think I wouldn't have had it any other way, to be honest.
Um, what what's become apparent to me is like when you're is really the people focus, like and the impact that you have on people. Even when you're talking about being a truck driver, you're talking about the impact that you have on their lives. Like you could picture a family who's, I don't know, put everything into the truck, living in Melbourne and shipping it up to Brisbane, like very focused on the impact that you're having on people, which I don't know if that's a natural thing, but for you or if it's developed over time, but it ties in well to we've talked a lot about relationships because I know that relationships like we've talked about it quite a bit where they're very important to you in terms of how you approach your work and your leadership. What role like I'd like to hear about in when you either when you were with a task force or homicide, like what how did relationships play a role in that and how did you approach them? Because when I think of a homicide detective and relationships, there's a little bit of me, and this is all based 100% on streaming shows, um, any kind of thing like that. But it's like having relationships, like developing relationships with the bad guys or the middle ones. I'm watching Mayor of Bankstown right now, and the main character kind of has relationships with Bunny Washington, who's actually does a lot of bad stuff as well. But in the end, he can justify it. So I'm not asking you that if you had to justify anything, but it's more about understanding like what role did relationships play in that kind of environment for you, and how did you approach them?
A relationship, and I think that period of time when I felt quiet, when I certainly felt the tension of being at Piranha, it was very much an organised crime investigation. It wasn't about people. It wasn't,
Mm.
I'm very much I'd found a niche and a love for victim-based crime. And I think that played into it. And I think once I got to homicide, I was in my element. I was, I'm working with people. The stakes are quite high. I mean, you only have one opportunity in a lot of these things for, to make an impact on a family. And, whilst a lot of the TV shows, perceptions of homicide investigations is
Yeah.
getting to court and getting a guilty conviction and solving the crime and those sort of things. It's far from it. It's actually, your number one role outside some obligations to the coroner and the Supreme Court is like, but your number one role is actually to provide answers to the family because the one thing they all want to know is why and what happened. As hard as it is for them to hear and be faced with the realities of what actually occurred. Obviously, with a homicide, something has, manifestly gone wrong. People become such an important part of that. And, you know, going to a homicide, you can get called out at, we get called out at 3 o'clock in the morning. You may be gone for 2 weeks if it's in the country. But that single job will last with you and the crew for at least for the next 2 years. Whilst you investigate, prepare a brief, go to court, many different phases of court, trials, and the like, and then a coronial inquest. Your relationships with people and whilst a lot of the focus goes to the family and it always should, there's relationships with witnesses to ensure that they are with you along that journey of those 2 years so they can keep fronting up in court and providing the evidence that is required to support, the conviction. There's a lot of, even with the offenders, for someone to take someone's life, obviously something's gone a lot very wrong to do that.
Mm.
But in a lot of ways, you have to that relationship with that offender becomes incredibly important. And at the end of the day, whether you're interviewing a bikie or the like, and they're not going to give you anything, that's fine. But 9 times out of 10, or I can probably say 7, 8 times out of 10, if you have an ability and you have the ability to create a relationship and be able to talk to and speak with that offender, you're going to get results that are actually going to go a long way towards providing the answers to those families. And that may be the finding of the bodies so the family can say goodbye. So, when you start looking at relationships, it is so diverse. There's families, there's associated families, there's the internal stakeholders with forensics and the teams that you need to lead to be able to bandy together to make sure the crime scene, there's the court and the barristers. You've got to form a relationship with defence barristers, which a lot of us wouldn't have much time for unless you've been defended by one. Um, there's just, yeah, people became the centre of absolutely everything you did, and you couldn't pass judgment across any of those suite of people. You treat them
So
all the same.
I want to. You said something. You said it kind of just in passing, kept going, but I want to dig into this. These relationships, like developing relationships with the offenders.
Hmm.
Like, how do you do that? Because it's different. I think in the workplace, you think about how you can get to, talk when I'm talking about relationships with groups, we talk about creating that connection and trust. And a lot of that comes with working together, spending time together, getting to know each other at a real personal level. We talk about creating an environment of psychological safety. And then if you've got those two, you can use things like feedback and differing points of view really well. But to develop a relationship with an offender, that to me, yeah, it baffles me. Like, how do you go about doing that?
Um, you keep an open mind with that. But I might play this out a little bit in what I do now as well, AJ, because there's some similarities to how I work in my current role and team and leadership that applied back then as well. And a lot of that, people and behaviours in the corporate workspace where I am now. There's going to be people that are going to have behaviours that aren't going to align to yours. They're going to be disruptive to a team. They're just going to, but they are who they are in relation to that.
Mm.
When you're interviewing an offender, at the end of the day, if you are doing your job well, they are the ones who have made the choice to not, to do what they've done. They've made that choice. The impact that you then can have is not compound that, because the courts, in that sense, the courts will actually, the truth will come out. There's no reason to really, dig the heels in and put your ego in the way of an investigation or an interview that actually could be lost at court, which is a huge impact. There's, people in the workplace, they're going to have behaviours and they're going to be shaped by their own experiences. That are going to show up at work, whether that's something that's going on at home in previous life and those sort of things. So when you put these two scenarios together, there's not a lot of difference. The one thing that I've found, and this is a personal perspective, is that if you learn to get to understand the person, you're actually going to learn a lot more, so you can make better decisions on that person. So, um, in the homicide sense, you learn and understand why they've actually got to the point of taking someone's life. That most of the time they're all people. They're all shaped by their own, as I've sort of mentioned a couple of times. They're shaped by their own perspectives. That once you start to learn to understand, it's not that you have to agree with it. And believe me, I didn't sit there and agree with why they did it, because at the end of the day, but at least I understood. And when I could stand in front of a jury or a Supreme Court or in front of a family, they just want to know why. Here's a reason why that he has provided, and I can provide that story to them. If my ego gets in the way during that period, he's not going to tell you anything, he or she, or they're not going to share that with you. You're not going to have the answers to share with the family. Now, fast forward here, at the end of the day, if they're not going to trust the business and they don't like the team or the environment that they're in, or they really struggle with those different things, that's still going to be their decision. But at least I have, you apply a level of understanding, wanting to understand why, digging a little bit deeper of why you're acting out this way, why these behaviours are showing up at work, your ability to give them, what the impact of those behaviours in a team environment. At the end of the day, if they don't feel comfortable, they don't feel comfortable, but you can do everything possible to allow them the opportunity to be part of that team. And most of the times, if people just don't trust the business, so you can't change that, they start to question. And I've had quite a few in our team recently. This place is hard. It's actually not where I want to be right now. And at the end of the day, the relief and the smiles that come from them in that workplace now, and you speak to them since they've left and go, I'm glad I've made this decision. So you've been able to work through a solution without having to put your ego in the way and assert authority.
Yeah. It's interesting. I just finished reading Mel Robbins's The Let Them Theory. And what you said was kind of echoing with similar lines what she was talking about. Like you said, you can't change people if that's how they're feeling. That's who they are. You can't change that. And Mel Robbins was in the book talks about the same thing. She's like, you can't actually motivate somebody. They have to be motivated themselves. And if they're in a situation or a place where they don't feel right or they don't have that energy or feel like they're in the right place, you actually can't change that. You can acknowledge it, but in the end, it's got to be up to that individual to really to drive or make that change that's going to make them happy or make them motivated. Um,
I think
so
that's
maybe
what I could have said a lot shorter. But you're right. That's exactly right. They can acknowledge it. I acknowledge, you acknowledge the reason why they decided to take someone's life. You don't have to agree with it. And at the end of the day, you made that, they make that decision. In the private sector now, they make the decision whether they're on board, they love the vision of a business, the direction of the team members and the like. You can't change them. But one thing you can do as a leader is learn to understand them. And you're going to, you're able to, form opinions with um, a lot more acknowledgement of who they are, and maybe just gives you a bit of the reason why, what's driving some of these things.
Yeah. Um, Again, we keep going down this path and understand more of your experiences there. I want to shift a little bit now because that I kind of look at it like you've got. Well, now I didn't know about the truck driving, so I'd say there's four phases to your career. There might even be more, but if the police department, the homicide was, let's call that chapter two. Chapter three was you went from homicide, high performing area, place that you had really strived, that was really important to you. Then all of a sudden you're working with AFL. Can you tell us a little bit like what drove that change, and then what did you end up doing with the AFL once you got there?
Yeah, it was an interesting. So I did just under 6 years or 5.5 years or so with the homicide squad. I was the next logical step within the policing environment is to get promoted to become a sergeant. So you really start to step into not to do it, but you start to become that middle management. And it was time. And I think I also had a bit of self-awareness around the impact of homicide. It comes with its stresses, as powerful
Like on the
and
human
amazing
side,
the
you mean
work is.
like
Yeah, yeah,
individual? Yeah.
absolutely. There was a bit of that at play. Young family. There was some different things. The next logical step, in policing was to become a sergeant. I did all my exams and um, was already in discussions around promotion. A good friend of mine came to me and said, "Hey, uh, within the police force, hey, would you be interested in coming to the Sporting Integrity Intelligence Unit, which is a small, very small unit within Victoria Police that works with all the major sports in an anti-corruption, organised crime links
Mhm.
into sport. Incredibly niche space, very much a stakeholder. But what really attracted me to it is the ability to work with sports. Had a very front-facing stakeholder management piece to it. You weren't dealing with, the 5% of the population. You're dealing with 95% of the time, as in, the heavy side of the community. I thought it was why not? I mean, to be honest, this is a little bit around, never always consider the opportunity that's before you, and I took it. Now, I didn't expect that within 9 months, a former colleague would be saying, we're expanding the AFL Integrity and Security Department. Would you consider a role at the AFL? And I actually said no, because I think, there's superannuation leave and policing is
Yeah.
it's a good job. There's, all those, but um, I looked at it twice. I looked at it a third time, and then I picked up the phone and said, "Hey, is that role still going?" And yes. And there was a bit of leap of faith, job security, all those things. And there was a leap of faith to say, what a great opportunity. I mean, I love football. I love sport. I had the baseball side of things. There was this feeling of, do I really need to be identified through policing? And I was just in a phase, and it was, again, an opportunity in time that came presented before me, gave it a lot of thought. Is it an opportunity? Is it not? And worked through it. And I took it, and off we went.
So how did you justify that internally? Like, you think about, yeah, there's certain organizations, police, there's a lot of, let's just talk it, there's a lot of benefits that can keep things comfortable now and in the future. You had 12 years, let's call it brand equity. People knew who you were, they knew what they got. You developed obviously a pretty good reputation. To make that jump is it's a big step, particularly into something that you hadn't done before. Can you share kind of what was the, you have the two voices, just, yeah, do it, no, don't do this. What were the voices that were saying, go for it, man? Like, don't hold back, give it a go. How did you justify making that jump?
Um, a lot of it was, I mean, there was some financial side of things, spoke to a financial advisor around, so, what does it look like? I probably, if I left it another 5 years, so I'm going to get out of there, I might not have made that decision from a personal and financial
Mm.
and family
Yeah.
point of view. Very supportive wife. Uh, just go for it. The one you say no to is the one that's going to get away. So there was a little bit of that. But I think first and foremost, that decision was, and one thing I've learned a lot about myself is that I love learning and I love growing. And I think that appetite, and AFL, I mean, there's the AFL in our local sporting market is incredibly powerful. I know there's people from New South Wales that probably do not agree with me on this call. But to work at the AFL was, wow, that would be pretty good. I knew that I had enough, there's enough transferable skills for me to be able to be okay in that environment. I had a good understanding of the sporting integrity side of things. I knew how to run an investigation, dealing with players. I mean, to be honest, it was a lot easier. You're dealing with players. You're not dealing with
Mm.
hardened criminals. In a sporting environment, you're in the best, the biggest professional sport in the domestic sporting market in Australia. Want an ability to do it, and once I got there I was in the middle of the MCG, 20 metres away from the Western Bulldogs. Winning a premiership I'm standing on the MCG. I'm watching grown people cry in the stands because of their first premiership. That connection to people, the power of football you could see at its highest. And I knew then I'm really comfortable with this. It was cool. It was exciting. I knew I could add value through some transferable skills, and that, put me into a totally different phase of my career.
Yeah. And you were involved with when the AFL went to China. Can you tell us a little bit about what were you and your team responsible for when you guys did that?
This is a little bit about why. Yeah, I mean, would I have known we're going to China when I joined the AFL? Not a hope.
Hmm.
Would have, 5 years earlier at the police force, with you saying you're going to be flying up to Shanghai 8, 9 times a year and leading the security and venue operations for an AFL game in China. People have different views on playing the game in China and waste of time and the like. However, it was one of the most amazing experiences, one to be in Shanghai and China. But really, one thing that I will always take out of China, and I know, there's a lot of negative press in relation to that, but one thing I loved about working in that environment is their innate understanding of relationships and how, forming old traditional valued relationships is something that they just cherish. It's ingrained in them. And there's a real beauty around the way that they go about their relationship building. As I
Uh,
said, please do not judge me on the political side, but I'm just talking very much on the personal side
how did they do that? What would that
with
look
this.
like?
Also, I mean, bit of context behind why I was chosen. I mean, to play a game in AFL, they thought we were soccer. There's a huge security. We had to get approvals from local government, Shanghai government, and even, the Chinese government in relation to playing the game there. So to operate commercially, they're very protective. I mean, there's no doubt there's some real drawbacks on China and the way that they operate. It's so different. Once we're able to sort of generate that level of operations in China to get the game over the line, I was very much sitting there with an interpreter, but to my left, in front of a panel of high-ranking police trying to justify why Port Adelaide have green and their flag. I had to get their flags. Everything had to be approved. Everything was to the nth degree. So you're sitting there pleading, and the whole game rests on the approval of all the different things. So we, for context, for their first first game in 2017, we had over 1,800 police at the venue because they thought we were soccer hooligans because they were so protective of an international broadcast and a reputation. There was more police nearly than people. But they are so protective of that. We had to brief the players before the game. There's no wrestling. They scuffle on the field. The Chinese threatened, the government threatened to cut the international broadcast because they didn't want it to be, reputationally damaging to them. It was crazy, but in amongst all that, what we were very much, we got a lot of help from the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade on how to build relationships, from commercial, sport and operations venues over there. And a lot of it is that they're very, very values based, but they open up, they once they have the trust of you and you're able to display the trust, to them, that they will open up tenfold. And they say 3, 4, 5 years it takes, and we got to year 4 and they just trusted us. They knew it. There was just this overwhelming welcome feeling that they gave to us to be able to operate and play this game of AFL in the middle of Shanghai and Yangpu district. So, but I still speak to some of the operations team. They put on the team that we were dealing with outside of government was the ones who put on the Shanghai Grand Prix, the Shanghai Masters. They're pros at it. At putting on major sporting events. So there was a bit of commonality there.
I would imagine in both Chapter 2, working with the police, and Chapter 3 now with AFL, like you're working with a number of different stakeholders, even internally. You're working with people who are under the same team, right? The police, the AFL. But one of the challenges that I'm seeing and I'm hearing about is like there's two. There's one about working in silos, and the second one is like that internal competition. And I imagine like when you're leading something like a project of going to China, like a different country, bringing a new sport, people here are used to working one way, and want things done a certain way. To me, that's kind of similar to working in an organization where you're working under the same banner, but you're trying to achieve different things, or there's competition, or people pushing their agenda more than maybe the overall good. What tips would you share in terms of like I don't know if we need to stop the competition, but how do you manage that? Like, what advice would you have in terms of how to manage those internal uh, lobbying instead of maybe the overall big?
Yeah, it's a good question, Joe, because I think this is probably one area for me that I'm still really growing in. This is, how to manage. So I know I'm very aware that I'm very much a people person, and that comes with so many positives. The other side of being the type of people values led person that I am is that you can be taken advantage of. You can be seen as being indecisive. You can be seen as not having that ability to work it. So things like you just said, and internal tensions or tensions will show up and they land with me a different way than maybe what it would with others. This is very much a work in progress. And one thing I think, policing was a totally different environment. It's incredibly male dominated, and to be honest, I'm so glad I'm out of that environment now. As much as the work is amazing and there are a lot of good people in there, I think an environment for me to thrive now looks a lot more as inclusive, collaborative environment. I enjoy collaboration, enjoy people. When that doesn't go to plan, for me it is I'm really working on at the moment is when that tension or with that that feeling of frustration starts to present inside of me, has been really acutely aware that it's sitting there, trying not to have an emotional reaction. I think one of the key things that a good coach of mine gave me last year, she goes, use the pause theory. It's pause all action until serenity exists. This is it's not a gap for mine. It's very much something that I am working on. And when that shows up and working here at Melbourne Park, an incredibly amazing and dynamic place to work in. We've got 5 venues. We do over nearly 450 events a year over all the venues, Australian Open, internal. I'm only responsible for one venue at the moment, but you're also expected to work collaboratively and try and break down silos. That tension and the like plays out a lot. So I think, my advice, or, the way that I'm working on it is through reflection. I'm constantly asking, how am I contributing to this? Trying to keep an open mind, go back to that policing,
Mm.
just
Yeah.
being very open and understanding to what's actually going on, what's real and what's not. Really practicing, I feel like I have a good level of perspective. I think nothing will take me back to the days of homicide, and in that there, I think perspective in life is one thing that I'm very fortunate to have across all spectrums. There's nothing I feel like here in this job that would not be able to handle, as far as something that goes wrong in an event here will never
Yep.
be as worse as standing at a homicide scene and having to make dynamic decisions in that environment. So I feel like I've got that one well and truly there. But I think, empathy, putting myself in the shoes of others is a really key part for me. And I think, to sort of pull all that together is one thing is that when the trust is not there with others, I'd struggle a little bit. There's no doubt about that. And I think really starting to learn that piece for me now is that's my goal. I'm trying to work on that every day.
Yep.
I think I'm getting better at it, but it is dealing with tension in the workplace and others without emotionally showing that and that ability to take a step back until serenity exists and then to make good decisions is the
So,
key.
so you're like, I'm just going to throw out to the group if anybody's got any questions. Um, I'm going to ask Kerry one more, and then anybody, if you've got some questions, either unmute yourself or you can put them in the chat function, and I'll ask them. But I kind of wanted to double click on this bit that you're working on, this trust bit, and can trust. So, like, is trust binary? Is it you either have it or you don't, or it's there sometimes, it's there not? Like that's a separate question or discussion that we could go on quite a while. But do you think can trust be rebuilt? And it's like, what does it take to, well, actually, can it be rebuilt in your mind?
In my mind, yes, I'm an incredibly forgiving person. I think that's, I'm really comfortable to be able to be open to that because um, I do struggle with, when you've had your trust broken, as I said, when you're a
Mm.
people values-led person, your trust can be taken advantage of pretty easily. I've learned that the hard way. Um, Trust can be rebuilt, absolutely, but it's going to take both of you. It's just not, okay, well, you've broken my trust. You need to now earn that respect. There's also, um, there's an element that, you take responsibility for that as well and be open to mending that trust because they will try, people and, there's, got some numerous examples within our team, the people that are in our team where trust has been broken. I know that I have to be open to mending that because they are committed, they are committed to it. At the end of the day, if it doesn't work, it goes back to our first real point. At the end of the day, people can't change. Let them be the way that they are.
Yeah.
But if you don't give it a go, you will never know either. And you may be missing out on something if you're not open to be able to mend that trust.
Yeah. I love how you said it actually takes both of you. So it's very easy to say, oh, I'll get over it. I'll trust you.
Mm,
But if you're in that situation where that trust is broken, to me, what I'm hearing is what I'm picturing is that there's a conversation that outlines what happened. When you did this, this is how I took it on. Or Brené Brown talks about telling the story that you interpret. I saw Carrie take the chocolate bar out of the fridge. That was my chocolate bar. The story in my mind is that Carrie's stealing my chocolate bar and I can't trust them anymore with any of my food. Now that's the story I'm telling myself. But unless I have that discussion with you to understand what's your story, what happened there, um, it's hard to rebuild that trust or even get a proper understanding and have that opportunity to rebuild it. But I also think
mm,
too, I like how you said it can't be just on you, but you got to have the conversation and set expectations for the other person.
mm.
Um, that's what I took out of that. Anyway, that's where my mind was going.
Those things, I'm learning a lot in the importance of expectations, boundaries, especially as a leader of a team, very highly operational area that we are running a venue like ours. Um, there's a lot that I'm learning in amongst all this. I don't have all the answers. Like, yeah, now I see why accountability. How you blend into accountability without being authoritarian
Yeah.
is key. And using power in leadership is not something that I subscribe to. It's not. It's like a sugar fix. It doesn't lend itself to sustainable relationships and thriving teams.
Yeah. I like that. Power is a sugar fix. That's that's good. You sound like a thought leader here, Kerry. Um,
Yeah,
we
I've done it before, and I'm like, yeah, I probably shouldn't have said that. And you realise at the end of the day, it was just me trying to feel good about myself. That's not the way. So,
yeah. Um, you touched a little bit about your role now. Can you just share? I'm just conscious of time as well. But I just like if you can share a little bit. What have you learned? So now you're leading an operations team at a venue that's hosting events day after day. You're changing from a basketball court to, I don't know, a concert setup. I remember seeing some of the videos of some of the work that you guys have done. What's the biggest thing you've taken? Because you've been in this role for how long now?
just a little under 3 years. So next May will be 3 years.
Okay. And you've gone through a
Yeah.
little bit of a journey to get the team aligned with and uh, in terms of getting the team to work really well as a unit, and there's been some ups and downs with that. But what's the biggest learning you've taken over the last 3 years in terms of getting a team to a point where the relationships are strong and everybody's on the same page? What have you learned?
It's hard work. And if you're ever in that position, and I think, I've gone through so many times of self-doubt, am I ever going to get there? But I mean, for context, I inherited a very much a splintered team back in 2022 in a venue that is quite old, operationally challenging. The day that I got my job, my now general manager who I worked with at the AFL, she goes, "Congratulations on your job now. We need to have a chat about your team?" And I'm like, "Oh, great. Okay." So here I was excited to get that phone call, obviously. Here I am being able to, but we'll do that. So um, nothing's linear in relation to teams. I am really learning. A
Say that
lot of the
again.
time,
Nothing is
nothing is linear in building teams.
okay.
Nothing just, okay, we're going to rebuild a team. We've been able to, a lot of it was having some real honest conversations with the original team that was here, understanding the why, understanding why they're feeling that way. And a lot of it goes back to what we've discussed before. Trust in the business, not valued by previous leaders, not valued within the business. No one hears us. Those, once we sort of moved through that, there was a lot that you couldn't change. But as we've rebuilt this team, whilst we have to continue to deliver, obviously, events, we have gone through ups and downs. I've gone two forward, one back, and I'm already sort of through nearly a half a change again. We've had people that have come, they're about to go, I have an opportunity to reset a little bit. But I think you're going to always feel 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And I think just be kind to yourself through these, because that's one thing I've learned is like, does the business really, am I doing this well? Am I not doing this well? I know I've got their backing, but I'm not too sure. There's a lot of different times where it can be quite lonely. So
So how do you deal with that loneliness? Like what strategies or what approaches do you put in?
talk to good people like yourself. Um, no, I think for me personally, I need sometimes reassurance. I will speak to people that are close to me. I think, one thing I've learned the value of mentors and coaching is, being open to that,
Mhm.
um, being open to being kind to yourself personally. I think that's the big thing. It's okay. You're not going to get it. You're not going to nail every moment in leadership. You're not going to know. There's a lot along this where I haven't nailed it, and a lot, those I've had those moments. But I think just sticking true to your values and knowing that you are there to, to have an impact on people. Don't ever lose sight of the people.
Yeah. Cool. Um, what's There's a couple of just kind of high level but real deep thinking questions here for you, just to kind of to finish up. If you look back on your career and then where you're at right now, what's one piece of leadership advice you wish you had learned earlier?
Um, I would have loved to have known very early on how to operate in ambiguity a lot better. So ambiguity in all our situations, doesn't matter what part of life, is we've just got to learn to deal with it. Nothing's always going to be great. Nothing's always going to be, bottom. But I think learning to live in that space of ambiguity, I think if I were given the tools to be able to learn that a lot easier, I would have loved to have learned that. So, you can deal with nearly every situation.
Yeah, great. Um, and if there was one thing you wanted to, if there was the best piece of advice of leadership that you got, and that might be from somebody else, it might be a quote that resonates with you. But if there's one thing you wanted to leave with this group, because we've got a real, looking at our group here, and I think everybody in here is a people leader. A lot of the people here are on senior roles. And then we've got a couple also that are kind of on the up and up. Like I know we got Daniel here as well. And he's kind of on that trajectory, maybe at a different stage of where I'm at in my career. But if there's one piece of advice that you thought all leaders need to keep this in mind, what would that be?
Um, I think it's just your ability to understand yourself at the end of the day is the key to leadership, because without that understanding of who you are and what you have, it makes it pretty hard to lead others. And I think I've learned that through different experiences. I think the other thing is, like, I've told a story today that resonates obviously with me. It's my story. I think each and every one of you is, whether it's on this call, and I say this if I'm ever asked it, is learn to understand your story and being able to tell it. I mean, to come on here and tell your story, because I think I could listen to everyone on here and I'll be just equally as interested as everyone else's story. I think everyone's going to have a story that's unique to them. And I think the only way that we actually do lead, we do learn from other leaders, is actually listening to their stories and experience.
Mm.
We're all shaped by our own experiences. Mine is the story that we've, been very fortunate to share today, but everyone else has got their story, and learning how to and being comfortable with that story is key.
All right, that brings us to the end of this episode. Thanks for joining me on Teams That Swear. If today's conversation sparked a thought, a question, or maybe even a new perspective, hit subscribe so you don't miss what's next. And if you're ready to transform how your team works together, reach out. I'd love to help. Because teams that swear by each other and not about each other don't happen by chance. They happen with intentional, deliberate action, and the first step starts with you.